Hello out there, Facebook land. I am having some fun exploring more of Facebook Live features. I just realised you can schedule Facebook Lives to start. Amazing. I'll start using that. It's Sylph Dominic Hawkins here. Welcome to Friday night Hoshinden philosophy and theory video. Tonight is Friday the 8th of May. And I'm here again at beautiful, sunny, downtown Reigning Spirit Dojo, Melbourne. Now, we'll give a couple of minutes for everyone to jump on board. So I'm going to start off the video pretty casually while we let everyone jump on. Hello, guys. Welcome. I'm amazed at all the different things that I've discovered that I can... I just found today that I can do a split video Facebook Live. I didn't know that I could do that. So that will absolutely be something. That'll definitely be something that I want to play out. Hello, guys. Stephen, Stacey. That'd be fun. I was like, well, that answers that question. I was thinking that with some of the interviews I wanted to do, especially with Jeff and Craig and Nakadai Sensei, that I'd have to pre-record those on Zoom and then just put them up as a video. And now looking at how Facebook Live allows me to do split screen broadcasts. Oh, great. See if I can get something ready for next Friday, hey? That'd be pretty cool. Maybe with Jeff Smith or Craig Guest. I'll have a chat to them. So I hope that you're well. Like I said, I'll give another couple of minutes. We'll probably get started in about a little bit of time, I won't say. When the number of viewers meets the level that I'm expecting for the students for tonight. And I'll just set up my video. Are you guys well? You can remember that during the session, I love seeing your posts, so definitely write in, comment in the little section, and your likes and love hearts and laughing faces and all that jazz. They pop up on the screen as I'm talking, so I can see them. I can't type back, but I can kind of nod and wave when people come and go. It's been a lovely couple of days. The last 2 days have been beautiful weather. I'm really glad that winter's over now and we've moved on to spring. That 1 week of winter that we had there, start of May, was just too much for me, and I'm really glad that that's over. Now it's onwards to summer. Don't know about you guys. But generally it's been a good week. Like I said, I'm here from sunny Reigning Spirit Dojo, downtown. And I'm well, thanks, Stace, very well. Dojo is good. Dojo hasn't really changed. Look, I'll show you around. I know it's been a month and a half for some of you since you last at the dojo. I don't know if you can see, but it's basically the same as it was. The exception is that we've got, obviously it's got a lot of storage, the dojo, while it's not being used currently for people. There's no martial arts happening here. But it is being used for storage. And so myself and some others storing a whole bunch of stuff here. Very useful. Paying for a factory, better use it anyway. What else has been going on? I think that's about it for Dojo Update. It's been very stable, very lovely. Oh, shout out to Lisa Milili, who's been doing an awesome job with the online Reigning Spirit Dojo portal, training portal for kids and teens. If you're watching this video, Lisa, 10 points. I'm so impressed. I jumped on and I watched your videos when you put them up. I just went and had a look at your YouTube channel. So those of you who don't know, Lisa's started her own Reigning Spirit Dojo YouTube channel as like her own subset, not the official channel, where she's putting up her videos, her training videos, and you can access them. So write to Lisa if you want to get access to that. And they're cool. Man, the teens videos you could do as adult fitness videos. And so some of you guys might be keen. So send Lisa a message if you're feeling like, the Easter eggs are packing on and you actually haven't moved for 2 months. I'm sure that she'd be happy to get you involved in her little program. Very cool. What else? I think that's about it. Stephen Leaford, I have finally finished the essay topic question for you that I rounded out, and I'll send it to you. I'll do it tonight. So that's for your Nidan exam. And you've got quite a long chunk of time to get to sit at home and write that essay. It'll be really fun. A reminder to Rory and McKinnon as well that your essay, the question still stands from previous year. And remember, hopefully, I know that you guys are working at this time, but if you do have extra time, now's a really good time to be taking some opportunity to add on to those essays and write, because they're hefty, yeah. Oh, I'm still here, Stephen. I don't know about you. Okay, let's get started. So tonight, I know we've been jumping around a lot with these topics on the Fridays and covering a lot of ground, and my goal is for this video series, even when we get back to doing physical training and we're doing back to weekly classes, my goal is that this video series can exist online in the archives, in the Hoshinden archives and resources, to be able to provide really good theoretical content, especially for students approaching their black belt grades, who need to be able to have an understanding of some of these things, the etymology of the development of thought and the process and the history and how it is that this has come about, where this has come from, etc. So I am jumping a lot. I have a list of topics and I move them around depending on what I think would be more appropriate week by week, in contrast to the previous topic, as opposed to just A to Z. What I want to talk about tonight is to actually look at the development of Japanese martial arts in terms of the paths, the historical paths that led to Hoshin and the Chinese martial arts. And then kind of put them into some context with world spiritual movements and thought and ideologies. And a lot of it then comes to present, that explains that. That's a really good... That paints that picture, that fleshes that out. For, I think, Rory, this might even be part of your Nidan essay topic, so definitely watch this video. But you're not allowed to just copy and paste what I wrote. So let's go way back. Let's just first of all define Hoshinden, which is obviously, as I've said before, this is my interpretation and presentation of Hoshinden Jutaijutsu, which I studied. And it's merged with my study and interpretation of Bujinkan Budo Taijutsu, which is my other study. So my two backgrounds of martial arts are Hoshinden Jutsu and Bujinkan Budo Taijutsu. And then I have black belts in both and teaching degrees. And where in 2013, when I moved on from the Hoshinden Jutsu Australia Pacific group, then the thought and development of Hoshin, that's when it took its subset into what effectively is now called Hoshinden. That means the variation on the Hoshin rule. So it's not, by no means is it suggesting that, I might have coined that term and that might be the name of the style that I teach, Hoshinden Jutaijutsu, but I'm not suggesting that I'm at the top of that pyramid of the style. It's in homage to the art that Glenn produced and that then I got to study through my study with Hoshinden Jutsu Australia and my teachers there. And it's kind of a nod back to the roots of Hoshinden Jutaijutsu and Glenn's direct students and the work that they're doing. Yeah. So the den, the den on the end of Hoshin is like variation of, interpretation of. And you see that in other arts. So a lot of that, the development of my thinking in martial arts has come both from Bujinkan and from Hoshin. And of the Bujinkan side, we can talk a lot about the Japanese and Chinese historical development of martial arts and then the thought processes, the samurai, the ninpo, how they thought. Because if you've got a particular ideology at the basis of your society or your group, then there are things that's going to define the moral value hierarchy and even the possibility, like landscape of value that you are going to trend towards in a whole, as a group, as a society. So, if you have an ideology around this kind of Buddhist concept of returning to returning to Earth to be among the citizens, what do I call it? The plebeians, in an attempt with the development of the enlightenment of thinking, the enlightenment of the human consciousness, then already intrinsic to that is this idea that your goal is about adding value to humanity, to the human society, and contributing towards the overall enlightenment concept of the society, of the whole human culture. If that's your ideology at base, it's going to be very difficult for you to carry that ideology into war. So if that's your like really solid concept of in terms of your value ideal for your transcendental motivation, then that's going to inform your actions. And that isn't necessarily going to translate directly, very well, into, starting a global war. You ride over the hilltops decapitating your enemies. Like, that ideology doesn't really play into that terribly, terribly well. And I'm not saying that an ideology, that's good or bad. There are times where all things are required. Yeah? There aren't right things or wrong things. So in a contrasting kind of parallel, if we take the ideas of Confucianism and then where we're really honing in, we're talking about the things that are best for the society, structures and systems that are inherently generative for the culture and the structure of the society, of the social adhesion. So that kind of Confucianist ideal, well, under that frame of thinking, it would be much easier to say, okay, this group of people aren't, they're not contributing, they're actually doing things that are taking away from the cohesion of the larger group, and so under our ideal, we're going to commit acts against them because it still fits within our greater transcendental goals in our ideologies and our thinking. So those kinds of things can come about far more easily under that level of thought. And in modern political context, we have this on a very vague level. We have this when we talk about socialism, and like almost as a failed experiment, communism, but like socialism and in relationship to, say, capitalism and democracy. I'll put it into that category. And these are differing ideologies. And what we can see, if we look around the world today, you can see the effects, the play-on effects that some of these ideologies manifest generation by generation down in the thinking of the people, because it's what causes the allowance of certain acts and behaviour to even come about. So, for example, if you look at a particular country, if you look at a political perspective, so if we look at China and the Communist China Party, and we look at some of the acts that they play out in their country, it's, regardless of whether we think that it's whatever we think it is, good or bad, it's not surprising, if that makes sense. It shouldn't be surprising when you consider what the overall overarching goals of that ideology are, of the socialist ideology there. It's not about the individual. There's no interest in the individual. So why would, it shouldn't be surprising that actions and activities that are against the individual in relationship to the, in theory, the social structure, but really the hierarchy of, like the contorted hierarchy of abuse of power, it's not surprising that that's what occurs. Like, it shouldn't be surprising that Tiananmen Square occurred, because when we look at that from a Western perspective, especially from like a kind of Judeo-Christian Western perspective, where we're standing on the ideologies of individualism, we look at something like that and we imagine the individual humans, the individual people who were killed in that experience, yeah, and then we feel personal relationship to that, and we feel outrage and get cry, and so then it turns into a political debate. But if you look at that from a socialist angle, not an individualistic perspective, it's like, well, it kind of fits within the value system, doesn't it? there's this minority of people, of these individuals who are not contributing to the greater movement of the social order, and so they're removed. I don't know, it sounds heartless, but it's like from that level of thinking, it's almost, and I'm not a member of that party, I can't imagine, I wasn't there in Tiananmen Square, I didn't get to watch and be, in discussion with the people who were making those decisions, but I could imagine that the people who were making those decisions to drive the tanks forward over those students, they weren't considering them as individuals. They weren't sitting there mulling over late at night being like, should we kill Billy? I mean, Billy's a good guy, and his sister Susan. Should we? The irony, they're not called Billy and Susan. Should we kill Xingpa Susan? Yes or no? It's like they're individuals. That's the wrong question. It's just like, should we maintain the integrity of the social cohesion? And here's something that's getting out of hand. Well, yes. So we'll just mow down that issue. And at no point does the idea that they're individuals even enter the picture. So where I'm going with this is if we look at martial art styles, martial art concepts, different martial arts systems have different ideals. They're built on different ideologies because they're based on different spiritual thoughts and social concepts. So that's going to inform the way that, not only the way they treat the people and the students of the art, but the way that those students treat others and society in the world. I'm sure we can imagine, without me having to rattle off names of arts, certain martial arts that are very socially based. So it's about large groups of military practice, rote learning towards set goals and outcomes. So usually those martial arts are very technical based and they have very high technical study, lots of very specific short form repetition. En masse in rote learn lines, because that's the only way to train 1,000 people in 3 months. If you've got 3 months, if someone comes to you and says, "Oh, quick, Genghis Khan's riding over the hilltops, and he's going to be here in 3 months, and there's 10,000 warriors coming, 100,000 warriors coming with him, and you're the leading general of the country's military, and you say, okay, I've got 3 months to be able to put up some kind of defense against this. You don't make the decision, let's really individually work on a one-on-one level, maybe over a 10-year period with people voluntarily who are interested in this. Like, those are just completely different applications. That's when you say, okay, I've got 3 months. What's the most efficient use of 3 months? It's certainly not really helping people develop as martial artists emotionally, or even particularly spiritually or philosophically. It's, let's get spears and weapons into the hands of these people. I need to train 10,000 people per day in massive camps, 100,000 people per day in massive groups and camps, to be able to respond in kind to this event that's playing out. And then in theory, if that country was successful and were able to remain liberated from those experiences, then they'd have more time, they'd be able to change the particular type of training. But that's historically not what's happened. So then what you end up with, if you imagine a martial arts style that comes born out of state militarization, by its nature, that martial art will probably, more likely, be very sharp, sharp technique based and less principle based in the beginning, the short term. It will probably be really easy to teach to a wide audience of people, to a room of 1,000 people in lines, and it will be very effective against very specific attacks or circumstances or responses, and it will be pointed towards that. It will most probably be group focused, not individual focused, and the goal will be the survival of the majority of the group, not the survival of the individual. So that's just kind of logical reasoning from taking, a logical step of progressions from 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, thinking about a martial art that stemmed from a militaristic beginning. It's like, that seems logical. So then arts that were, underground is not quite the right word, arts that were more, they were studied and refined by smaller groups of people over a longer period of time, not, and to such a degree where the small size of the group meant that we may be talking about like 100 people or 400 people, in an army, not 10 or 100,000 people. So suddenly there is individualism in those groups, because it's small enough that everyone knows each other quite intimately, everyone knows each other well, or maybe they're all part of the same village or the same region. And then this art develops, it's going to naturally develop more individualistically than state-wise or group-wise compared to the government-based military arts. And it does so in an attempt to not only preserve the lives of the individuals, but to develop them philosophically. If they're going to be, if those individuals are living, let's say that it's an army of 100, and it's because they're living, those are all the members, the fighting age members who are living in this mountaintop village somewhere. Well, beyond the actual military aspect of their martial arts studies, those people have to live together in the society very closely. They have to live together with their family, with their friends, with children, with partners, with seasons, with crops, with farming. So they need to take approaches, they need to study martial arts that assist them in ways to develop approaches to better their entire lives. So effectively, those arts what you should find is that they present a much greater focus on principle learning and smaller focus on set rote pattern of technique. And I'm not talking about kata necessarily in terms of a small set of techniques like waza that you use to constantly extract something. I'm talking about a curriculum of 600 set techniques, 100 against knife, 100 against spear, 100 against sword, and they're rote studied by lines of 1,000 people at a time, because you already know the enemy who you're defending yourself against, and they always use, this is their great spear technique or whatever, So it's like, well, it makes sense that you defend against that exact technique. These other groups, the smaller groups, they tend to develop martial arts martial art develops on top of their ideologies that assist them to be able to deal with interpersonal conflicts and enable them to survive not just themselves but their culture or their views, I suppose, and their ideas over a longer period of time. So it becomes, although it's social based, it becomes if you're going to pass on a technique to defend against a spear attack, you can pass that on to 100,000 people all at once. If you're going to pass on a philosophy about the value of your culture, and it's very specific, that's a one-on-one exercise. You can't apply that. You can't make a video of that and dialogue this concept and then have 100,000 people automatically gain a depth of understanding and then carry onwards into the future the shining jewel of the social value or the opinion or the cultural belief system that you come up with or that you passed on from your own ancestors. So if what you're trying to preserve is cultural value, and that might be mixed up with things like strategy and goals for thrivability. But if you're going to pass that on, that's a very individualistic process. That's like one to one to one. So let's take an example of something like some of the samurai families. And now there's completely different. That's a very broad comment. I know. Take samurai all the way from the top of Japan all the way to the South Island, and they're completely different. Like coastal to mountain to valley to city-based. Compare the shogunate against like coastal navy-based samurai. You got their backgrounds and their learning are completely different. They come from completely different combat style backgrounds and ideologies. So I know that it's difficult. I can't just generalize the samurai, but I will. But so you're following with me. Where was I going with that? Oh yes. So if we go back, let's consider some of the ruling elite samurai families. And don't get me wrong, they weren't necessarily great people. They were often the oppressive upper class, who were very willing to maintain their position as the oppressive upper class. Yeah. So if you've got this village, let's say that there's 100 of these key top samurai in the army, in the fighting force of this mountain village, particular region. Maybe they work in direct succession to the lord of that region. And what they have is a very intact process of training that goes from, and in that time, goes from like the patriarchal head of that family to the eldest son, perhaps, as an example. And that's the progression down of this training, and it's very one-on-one. It's very individualistic. It's very tight. And there might be many of those children in the village who are all studying together under their own heads of house, of the village-wide martial art system. But the rest of the culture are out farming rice, and weaving clothes and building houses and just generally living their day to day. So growing vegetables. This particular warring force, it's within that context that these heads of the house, these patriarchal heads of the heads of the family, are handing down, say in that example, to the eldest son, not just fighting techniques, but financial strategies or management systems to oversee the family. I mean, the expectation that the patriarchal head will die either violently or through disease after battle. If the goal of that, if the purpose, of that head of the family in that idea is to ride off to battle as a fighting force in the village, well, there's a very high probability that they don't come back. If that's the case, and then the head of that family falls to, say, like the eldest son, then it's not just fighting techniques. That eldest son needs to be able to manage the house and needs to be able to actually grow and develop and follow and continue on with as much stability as possible, continue on the values of their ancestor, and so on and so on and so forth. So the training and the learning needs to somehow get across from the father to the son, that example, somehow get across economic strategy and intellect, and understanding. And it needs to get across broad wisdoms about it, and then present activities that lead the individual, lead the student to the positions where long after the death of the father, that student who takes over as the head of the family line, they're able to continue to grow and practice and develop. So just on there. So say that student needs to continue their development long after their teacher has perished. And so that's about the teacher providing activities that are going to constantly speak in depth to the student. All of this is a huge concept that you're passing on. And maybe a lot of that training is occurring while you're out, in the middle of town on a dirt floor with Bokken studying swordwork. But what you're really studying is strategy and technical application of correct timing. The idea being that individual, that student, they're able to actually continue the thriving of the household, of the family, not just in war, but economically and even with food, making wise decisions about what crops do we grow, how much of what crop, where do we grow, or we have to pay taxes of rice to the Lord. What percentage of rice taxes can we actually live under the burden of and still survive? All of those decisions are economic, but they're required, and they can be taught through the martial art itself. They can be taught as overall strategy for thinking, and then you get activities that start to flow in as training tools. Because people discover that we can produce these kata, we can produce these fundamental forms of movement that they'll continue to speak depths of understanding to the student for 100 years, thousands of years. So it's like, while the teacher is alive, they can provide something that will live on, that continues with some sense of the training, the learning, and it's almost like a vessel. Imagine the kata as being like a time capsule, not of the past, but of infinite human archetype, so that some of the things that have always been found some of the things that have always been revealed to the individual over centuries with these activities will continue to be revealed to individuals, whether it's 100 AD or 900 AD or the 1500s or 1900s or the year 2020 or the year 2150 or the year 3400. Those fundamental self-reflections, the learnings that come from that, they're just there. It's like providing a little. It's like a chunk of gold. It's just lasts, and it's incredible how it does that. So with these different ideas, then go forward a couple of generations. So we talk about the ninja, the ninpo, and that's a fascinating one. So from my understanding, we talk about the Togakure, which is one of the ninjutsu arts in the Bujinkan, the 9 styles. That Togakure himself was a samurai who was on his family were on the losing side of samurai civil wars, effectively. And that he fled. The story I'd read was that he fled in one particular battle away into the mountains, and he wasn't particularly chased after because he was considered to be a coward for running away, and that he's not worth any involvement or interest, or the expectation was that out of his own personal shame he'll probably kill himself off and do the job for us. But conveniently that didn't happen, and the discussion now, there's a lot of dates and times. We're talking maybe, and don't quote me on the time, but I think from memory 1000 or 1100 AD. I might even have that wrong. It might have been earlier. It's a long time ago. It's like around let's say 1,000 years ago. Ninja, the ninpo, if we take from my understanding of the term, it's nothing to do with people hiding in shadows or all that kind of modern media rubbish. It's the people with intent. It's those with intention, with those almost like, I've heard it also described in terms of perseverance, the intention to live, the goal of surviving, the goal of continuing. So it's the people, potentially you could say, the people whose goal is to persevere, the people whose goal is to live. You're like, well, that's a very powerful sentiment. That really puts into perspective the direction of their society, and then it suggests that the intent in the teaching and passing down over the generations is going to be about a lot more than just surviving in one condition. It's going to be general survival, general thriving, so that the things that have to be taught down the generations in those lines, if that is the case, if this is a group of people who are intent on persevering, well, they need food, and they need warmth, they need housing, they need to plan, they need to be able to not just have food once, they need to plan and cultivate seeds and farming and agriculture for next season and the year after year after year. So we're talking long-term thinking, long-term planning, and so then it's more obvious that the arts that come from those times, from those people, from those cultures, would have focuses on things like personal development, because conflict resolution between individual humans, which is obviously, if that happened on an individual level, then war doesn't happen on a broad level, yeah? So, but that's hugely dependent on a phenomenal number of factors that never play out. But if these people are going to survive long term, they need to work together. They're going to have to be able to dialogue, and not just with each other, but through their own internal problems and issues. Because otherwise you can't have a village of 1,000 people who survive. If there's infighting in 1,000 people, that's that's not good. That, like, you don't have the manpower in a group of 1,000 people to really be able to have 25% of those people fighting each other. That's disaster. Everyone would just perish. So it's easy to see that in that, from what we were discussing, those arts that come from those people, those ideologies, they would continue to teach activities into the future that would be about personal transformation and about long-term strategy, economic strategy, personal survival, thriving, like family-wide levels of understanding. So then if we fast forward, and you know, that's just a discussion of like the Nimpo, certainly from Tokakurei's family lineage. But if we just talk about the samurai in general, something I find really interesting. So you get to like the end of the 1800s, 1880, 1890, when a lot of the trade agreements, Japan's wanting to trade a lot with the Western world, especially with England. They've done a lot of trading with the Dutch for centuries beforehand, but now they really want to trade. They want gunpowder, they want ammunition, they want firearms, they want a lot of trade with England specifically. And there's a lot of demands that the West make about the Japanese culture changing in certain ways. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. It wasn't just out of the blue. I won't go into those. You can do your own research. But eventually what it leads to is slowly the oppressive upper class of the samurai, they get their rights as a portion of society get systematically altered and reduced. So that when you get towards the end of that era, that's when you see the laws come in, the famous things everyone talks about in Japanese history, modern history, about how then the samurai, it was illegal for the samurai to carry their swords with them in public, you know, or like unsheathe their swords in public. And it really starts to mark the decline of the public prowess of power that group of people had in that society. So what happened was, well, those samurai families, they didn't just roll over and die, you know. They didn't just suddenly go, well, we had our time in the sun, now we're all going to just become plumbers. That didn't happen. They had 1,000 years more of studying generation by generation strategy, good strategy, like broad long-term strategy. They looked at that, and a lot of them, it'd be interesting to get a list of this together, a lot of them turned their attention to the new trades of business with the West. And so then you end up with a lot of, quite a few of the modern Japanese corporations, like huge transnational global corporations that are samurai family run, or at least were started by samurai families, who turned their attention from their social status, in terms of their combat status. They turned that to business and economics, and did just as well economically as they, in that new paradigm, as they had done combatively. Like, they didn't just roll over and go away. They're highly embedded in the high echelons of Japanese society, and as such, it would make sense that they're kind of still passing down through their generations, you know, especially over the last like 140 years. Who knows? Maybe that's like 4 generations of heads of family moving with these companies. I wouldn't be surprised if they still pass on to their inheritors a whole range of activities and mythos and cultural learning, in the same way that we talk about we inherit these kata, or we inherit these practices for certain types of meditation, or we inherit these really specific defenses against knife and spear from a time in the past. They get passed forward. Well, so too these people pass forward their economic strategies, or their understanding of industry, you know, and how to manipulate industry towards their advantage. So if we now take this back to the start of the conversation, we look at Bujinkan, it's made up of heavily a lot of arts that were not necessarily state military arts. They might have been, portions of them might have been utilised throughout the centuries, but they were predominantly smaller clan, smaller village style, or maybe 400,000 people, styles with small combat forces who were very individualistic and were passing on to their next of kin, or the next generation, not just strategies for war, but strategies for survival, long-term, economic, agricultural strategies, personal transcendence, personal development strategies. So it makes sense that Bujin Khan ends up, through inheriting the martial art lineages of those, it also ends up accidentally inheriting the ideologies from those, and then inheriting the other activities, the non-combative activities. And although a lot of that might be learned through martial arts, there are still great activities there that are they're just basic social activities. It's almost like you could read the Sun Tzu, you read The Art of War, and that book's read as a book on combat, but it's really just a book on strategy. You could read that book and you could apply the thinking and the methodology to a business takeover, or you've got a competitor in business. You make spring mattresses, you've got a competitor who makes spring mattresses down the road, you're both competing on the same price, and then you go back and you read that book and you realize there's a lot more that you can manipulate about the circumstance and situation than just the price of your product and you've got this competitor. Yeah, there's so many other things at play. And this book would be useful in teaching you strategy for business. It would be useful in teaching you strategy if you are a parent with a teenager who's just butting up against you. And what you want to do is, you've shown yourself that just meeting the teenager head-to-head isn't really working. You actually want to demonstrate to the teenager the short-sightedness of their current opinion. And you mean to do it to help them to realise there's a lot more going on than what they are currently able to witness. And maybe that will help to soften their opinions, yeah, or whatever. So you could use that book as the parent who is talking to your aggressive 16-year-old or whatever, or 17-year-old, as a way of realising how you could strategise from your position in ways that the individual hasn't even considered. But these books are they're kept, not necessarily kept. It's like secrets hidden in plain sight. It's just that they're there, but because they're shrouded in the concept of a martial art or a combat or a militaristic perspective, the majority of society don't go there seeking wisdom. The Tao Te Ching is an incredible book, unbelievable. It's really just a treatise on how to govern well, and it's really beautiful. It's presented in a way. Obviously, it's socially contextual to the time that it was written, but it's presented in a way that is very humanistic. It even comes down to saying things like to a government, if you want the economy to do well, don't meddle in the economy. If you want people to thrive, stop meddling in the lives of the people. And he goes on to describe what the role of the government might be. And we're talking thousands of years ago. And then gives poetic demonstrations. So you could take that book, and that's a book on governance. You could see that as a book on how to ensure prosperity. And you could apply that to your family or to if you're the head of a company, you could apply that to your staff, your business as its own country in a way, like the reigning spirit dojo country and all the people it governs. Or you can apply that if you're the head of a state, if you're the head of a country, all the way up, all the way from the lowest, the smallest group denominator, all the way to the highest, then it's the same fundamental ideas. They might be tweaked slightly in detail, but humans are humans. Whether you're dealing with one of them or 10 of them or 1 million or 7 billion of them, humans are humans, and the human system kind of works in similar ways in terms of the needs we all have, the responses that we usually have if left to our own devices to interact in certain ways, the innate competition between humans that can be played out in ways that are useful. The competition in business is incredibly useful. That's where invention and innovation occurs. So all these ideas that, all these philosophies that are kind of slowly becoming very mainstream, they've been there all along. I mean, they've obviously always been there all along. But we now see them presented in terms of libertarianism and egalitarianism, modern social ideas about human nature. Like, we get that kind of from sociology when they do studies and they go, oh, well, we thought that this would be the outcome, but it turns out after we took surveys on 500,000 people, turns out that actually the majority of those people felt really alive. They felt more alive when they had a transcendent goal to get them out of bed in the morning than when they didn't. That's who'd have thought, It's like, but that's probably been the same it's been like that 10,000 years ago. I'm sure it's the same thing. Someone goes, we're going to build a great pyramid, and it's something to get you out of bed every day and motivate you in that direction. Oh, you're done. We're going to build another pyramid. Okay, we're going to build the economy. Okay, it's all about revolution and change, and we constantly kind of just move into the future, these transcendental goals that get us up and actually active, yeah? And then we feel satisfied and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So pulling this back around, it's easy to see why, and talking only from my experience, from Bujinkan and Hoshin, why Bujinkan is wrapped up in that's not true. Why Bujinkan presents, along with its combat study, it presents this very, very broad gathering of miscellaneous information, that when you view them from the lens of general thriving, so we go back to talking about like the ninja, the people with intent to persevere, the general goal of persevering long term, well then it's logical, super logical, because those are just requirements. You need to be able to grow food. You need to be able to at least understand cycles and seasons, or at least be able to view seasons. You need to vaguely understand economic moves and politics. And I said before, one of my favorite comments from Hatsumi Sensei, from one of his memoirs, is his note that he says, if you don't, I'm not paraphrasing exactly, yeah, if you can know economics and war and politics, then you can thrive under any circumstance in any epoch. It's like, yeah, I think that's true. If you're able to realize, to look at what might be going on somewhere in the world and then strategize around that, well, of course you can succeed. And I personally have found that no matter what occurs on any particular event, whether it's small or large scale, there are always people who do well and there are always people who do badly. And I think that the question that martial arts asks me is, which side of that coin would I like to be on, both for myself and my colleagues, my friends, my family, and once I've decided which side of society I'd like to be on, the ones that do well or the ones that don't do well, then in what ways do I need to potentially look at my current circumstance and adapt things or change things and strategize correctly, learn from the people who seem to do well. And then, I'm not talking about a moral dilemma, not becoming a cruel dictator, just understanding some of the strategies at play. Stop being such a fool of considering that everything's out to my benefit, or that large social change is going to be good for me, when it might not. I might be one of the people that it pushes against. Like right now in the world, if you are a white, middle-aged Western man, you're probably at the lowest level of social standing in terms of the general social respect, that's a byproduct of all of the social change. So if you're in that category, it would be worth just kind of noting that, and it's like, I'm not middle-aged, but I'm a white, successful male. It's so strange that in the modern culture, that's like, almost like I'm a bad person. Oh, I'm doing something wrong. That's just, so looking at that individually, it's like, that's worth me strategizing. Use the things that I learned from martial arts. Use the concepts that I learned from studying timing and distancing and cycles and human behavior. Use those ideas and strategize. How would I potentially just exist in the way I want to exist, but maybe it's not, maybe me being out in the limelight isn't really, in the public face arguing something against the public trend. Maybe that's not really the strategic place for me right now because I don't have the resources to back that up, potentially. I'm just pulling out theoretical examples for you to try to give some context. So Hoshin, as an art, that is only portionally made up of Bujinkan in a smaller scale. On a larger scale, it's made up of a lot of kung fu, a lot of Chinese art, and a lot of American military study, which goes back to like German and French martial arts and sort of judo. So when you look at Hoshin, it has different values to Bujinkan, and that makes sense because Hoshin was produced in a different context. So whereas we could kind of say Bujinkan is this very individualistic, it's goal-oriented towards personal perseverance, long-term survivability and perseverance of the individual so that the group and the small village can survive another 400 years. Hoshin didn't have that problem. Hoshin was developed, in the 1980s, like late 1970s, 1981 or so, in a political era where we just had the oil embargoes and the massive economic issues of the 70s, and the 80s was quite a booming, very positive, productive time economically. So it's like it grows up in a context where maybe it doesn't really need. It's not like you're not going to starve to death tomorrow. Yeah. So maybe it's not going to really pass on strategies of growing food. I'm just pulling at straws here. Maybe it grows up in a context where there is enough food, there's lots of money available, there's lots of economic stability, and yeah, there's a Cold War going on, but for the most part on the individual level, things are fairly stable in terms of jobs and employment and food and housing prices and asset prices, etc. So there's all this time to devote to and resources to devote to personal transformation. So then the interest of the art, a lot of its basic goals in Hoshin, from my view, are about personal transcendence. Transcendence from what? Personal transcendence from the incorrect assumption that I know who I am. So it says, I know who I am, and it's like, well, that's incorrect. You don't really know who you are. And here's a whole series of activities, not only to demonstrate how little you know about yourself, but to provide you in a perfect, like, two birds with one stone kind of offering, with an activity to fill in some of the blanks and actually gain some reflective perspective. Because once you start to realize that you really don't have a handle on who you are and really what it is that motivates you on a deep level, then you can start doing something about that. You can start exploring, finding answers to those questions. So that's its context. It presents that. As much of Hoshin that is wrapped up in the perseverance of individual on a long-term perspective, it probably gets that from Bujinkan, or it gets that from individualistic arts that it's gathered. Whereas I would argue that it probably doesn't get that from Kung Fu. Because Kung Fu arts and some of those Chinese arts and Shaolin arts became military arts, they weren't really at risk. Those arts themselves weren't at risk of dying out. If the military takes on a combat system, and therefore some of the ideologies and the values of that combat system, you've pretty much ensured the survival of that combat system over a long period of time, even if the founders are wiped out, yeah? But if your entire art lives in a small village of 1,000 people, well, it makes sense that you're going to have goals about long-term perseverance of those individuals, because otherwise all of the values that you've developed in your culture will just be obliterated in one civil war. Someone rides in and just burns your village to the ground, and you've lost 1,500 years of development of ideas and culture and perspective and thought, and that's just wiped out. So it would make sense to me that those arts, they pass on individualism, they pass on passion for personal development and kind of strange, almost like teaching the individuals to strategize way beyond what the rest of the society strategize, the level that they strategize at. Maybe sometimes too much. I can think of a number of people I know who fall way off into the camp of like extreme paranoia. And I say to them, well, I can see your point, but is that really useful? Like, sure, whether we agree or disagree on all of the opinions, is any of that helping you? Is your life are you actually developing positively in the direction you want to go? Or is your attempt to gather information to strategize correctly so oppressive that actually you're just curled into a ball, unable to do anything? Well, that's the same. You might as well just have not gathered any information. If you're going to gather so much information that it's overwhelming and you do nothing with it, you're at the same point as someone who just gathered nothing. In fact, you're probably worse off, because at least the person who's gathered no information live in a kind of blind, ignorant bliss, and they're more willing to go out and get resources. They might accidentally discover that they've put, $100,000 away, or they've bought a house at the time where they start strategizing economically. This individual just was so overwhelmed and crushed into a corner, they didn't actually do anything. Now they have nothing to strategize with. So it's worth kind of noting that, there's sides of these coins. If you were to take an art like, what's something I'm probably going to get criticised for making a comment about? Let's take Krav Maga. There's one. So Israeli combat military art. And like I said, because of the way that the Israelis have taken that combat style into their military framework, the continuation of not just the art, but the values of that art are kind of assured for as long as the Israeli military exists. Those combat styles will continue and will be developed, and some of the values that have come from that will be developed. And so that will just continue onwards. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the way that those arts are then taught and presented, when you're teaching, like I said before, if you're teaching 10,000 people in rote learning camps because it's a military combat style, you don't have time to teach depth of philosophy. It's not like one-on-one. So if Genghis is riding over the hilltops and you've got 3 months to prepare, you don't have time to sit around and have lovely cups of tea and philosophize about the nature of being and really consider about the stars and the infinite universe. It's just like, that's just not on the cards. You're busy trying to build, get as much wood out to make as many spears as you can in that period of time. So it wouldn't surprise me if the roots of something like Krav Maga, and again, I don't actually know what the etymological development of Krav Maga is before it was involved in the Israeli. I don't know where it borrows itself from, effectively. I don't know what its ancestors are. I haven't researched that. But I wouldn't be surprised if originally it presented a much more broad, holistic philosophy of living, of thriving, and therefore it kind of suggested conflict resolution and economic strategy and financial strategy and also combat strategy and how to live well. As that gets taken and taught to 10,000, 100,000 people at a piece, those things are shredded. Those things are removed from it piece by piece, because you just can't do that. If we have to train everyone to defend themselves against Genghis and we've got 3 months, one of the subjects that spends 2 hours a day can't be poetry. It's just not going to happen. But in times of peace, these things come back and forth, and they sway. You see that through history. What's something that one of my favourite quotes? It's a combat quote, and it's I forget who says this. It might actually be I think it might even be Marcus Aurelius, actually, the Roman emperor. So this idea that in times of peace, that's where you develop not as an individual. It's where you develop as an individual. It's where you develop as a culture. It's where you develop as a society. In times of war, that's where you apply that's where you see the application of your personal developments. If you spent the times of peace developing solid wealth, then in times of war, you'll have resources to fall back on. If you spent the times of peace developing a society of well thought out individuals, then in times of war, you're going to have much more stable societal response and probably much more stable societal involvement in wars, or even in the ways that righteousness and vengeance play out. But if you've spent your times of peace kind of thinking that cycles don't exist, this will last forever, and you just flip all of your economy away, by the time that war comes, you're screwed. You don't even have the resources to be able to take part in defending yourself. Or if you've spent that entire time of peace kind of just having a surface level of understanding actually, here's even another one. If you spent the time of peace practicing and studying only combat, and then the time of war comes, then you'll apply that combat without moral philosophy. Then you potentially risk, as a country, going way too far, or as a military or as an individual, way overstepping. It's no longer self-defense. You're now on a righteous vengeance death march, obliterating anyone who opposes you on a global kind of level. And we've seen that play out. Lots. I can think of maybe 5 examples over the last 150 years of where, a culture or a country, they experience such, they don't do anything about their growing resentment of the people. And decades go by, and they keep kind of squeezing out things that don't really have inherent development value for the culture. And then the pendulum swings the other extreme, and suddenly they become bloodthirsty, righteous aggressors. When it's like, remember that that issue. What was it? Someone was talking about this in terms of the Palestine-Israeli political conflict. Someone sort of commented, is there anyone left alive who remembers what the original dispute was about? And I don't mean from a religious perspective. I mean, in terms of the 2 people who first got involved in that dispute, who've probably been dead for thousands of years, centuries, I don't know, that they're long gone. So what are the people who've inherited the dispute? What are they fighting for? What do they even remember? Have they lost all sight of what their goals were? They've actually lost sight of how to survive or how to persevere, because they've been so caught up in the dialogue, in the narrative, in the story. And so my suggestion, as we bring this one to a close tonight, my suggestion for students of martial arts that are arts that are individualistic by nature, such as Bujinkan or my perspective of Bujinkan and Hoshin, and lots of arts, Wing Chun, my suggestion to those of us who are students of those arts is to actually take on board the wholeness of what the teaching is presenting. And don't fall into the trap of thinking that there are components that are kind of like bonus questions, here's the real meat of it. And then, for the particular nerds who are actually interested, there's some reading on the side, but it's not going to be in the actual exam, so don't worry about it. All of that happens then is those components don't get passed on, and 100 years down the track, 20% of it will be gone, and slowly it will condense until it presents effectively like what the military do. It's just a reduced skeleton version of what it really has to offer. It's no longer about perseverance. It's no longer about long-term thriving and survival. It's now just about immediate short-term response. Someone punches you, do this. Someone grabs you with a knife, do that. Bam, 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 bam. But it doesn't actually inform people about how to live their lives, or it doesn't inform people about how to thrive, how to observe a situation and strategize, how to decide which side of the experience they would prefer to be on, and then potentially start making decisions and looking at the choices they make and work out whether they're on a path towards what they want, or if they're on a path towards their own personal deconstruction. So, it's been a lovely evening. Join me next week. Oh, actually, I wonder if any of you, I didn't post in the comment section, if you did have a listen to the Prophet recording that I put up for the dojo birthday on last Friday. If there's some interest, then I'll continue doing some voice recordings of some of the other books that I have. I know that a lot of the books that I have, you guys now don't have access to those because you didn't buy them before the current situation, and they're all at my house. So what I thought I could do is I could actually do little audio recordings of them. I'll just read through the chapters of the books. And if you're interested, especially some of Glenn's books, and just general martial art books, I've got some of Hatsumi Sensei's memoir books there as well. I'm happy to read and narrate so that there's access for some of you guys at home if you would like that information and you don't currently have it. So leave a post, and if there's a particular book that you remember that I have in the dojo library that you have wanted to read but you just didn't take the opportunity, but now you really want to, add it in the comments section, because I'm happy to take suggestions. And if there's a few people who put their hand up for one title, then I'm happy to start doing recordings of that title for you. I hope you have an awesome weekend. Have a rockin' week, and I will see you next Wednesday for meditation and breathwork, next Friday for philosophy. Have a good night, guys. Bye.